My argument with that is that if you've gone through a survival situation, you've gone through a POW camp, or you've been taken hostage, or you've been through sea survival, you will not be bouncing back to what you were before. You will not be bouncing back to who you were before, because you won't be the same person. If you think you are meant to be the same person, you can have problems. You've had an experience that has changed you. Coupled with that is that the society, the world you're coming back to, has certainly changed in their perception of you. They don't know how to handle you. Normally, most survivors want, above all, to be treated as normal, but the rest of the world can't treat them as normal. That's a quote taken from Dr. John Leach, a psychologist specialising in survival, which was taken in turn from Jonathan Franklin's book 438 Days, An Extraordinary True Story of Survival at Sea. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Modern Outdoor Survival. My name is Richard Prideaux, I am your host. I am a wilderness skills and survival and SAR instructor, and if you want to hear more about me, then go back and listen to the beginning of episode 0, an episode we recorded especially so I didn't have to keep reading out who I am every single week. This is a weekly podcast looking at the principles and the skills and the tools required for survival in an outdoor setting in modern life. This is the first episode, and this is our first weekly topic episode, and we're going to start with the letter A for attitude. Now, I want to get into the meat of this podcast in a moment, and producer Amy is waiting in the sidelines to ask me some questions that were written up after I gave her some notes about the topic. And before we get into that, I just want to say a few things about the format of the show. So I'll be answering 5 questions and answering them using to the best of my current experience and knowledge. And then we'll roll on into a few more things. If you're a supporter of the show, and you can find out more about that by going to modernoutdoorsurvival.com/support. If you're a supporter of the show, then you will be getting a longer episode and you'll be getting more content. But if you're just listening to this as the free episode from Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Acast or wherever else you found this show, then you'll be getting the bulk of the content. But I do urge you to go along to that support link and see all of the other perks and all the other access to a discussion community that you will get from that. Right, so with all of that out of the way, I'm going to hand over to Amy and she's going to ask me the first question. So, what have you got?
So the first question is, what should your attitude to survival be?
I think I'm going to start every single one of these answers with Okay, so the attitude to survival for most people is an incorrect or at least unhelpful one, and I think it's mostly created by what they ingest and digest through the media and through film and TV and books, maybe to a lesser degree or a greater degree now, I don't know. Social media, certainly. I think they get this idea that survival is something that happens immediately after a bad thing has occurred. The plane crashes, the car rolls over, the fire ignites, you're taken hostage, you lose your footing on the mountain trail, whatever it is. The survival situation is when survival starts, and that's when your attitude to survival should begin. And that's not what we teach, and that's not what we teach when we're working with professionals or the general public in the outdoors. The attitude we teach and we try to ensure that people create for themselves is that it is all about making good decisions at the right time. So that could be good decisions for planning and preparation and logistics, good decisions when you're looking at route choices or how you use a certain piece of equipment or how you assess risks when in the field, and good choices about what information you consume and what information and instruction you undertake when you're not doing your outdoor activity or your outdoor job. It's the things you read, the things you watch, the things you pay attention to when you're at home or when you're doing the thing that isn't the outdoor activity. And it's also about personal responsibility and awareness of potential outcomes, and not deferring your personal safety and the safety of the people around you out to someone else or some other entity and saying, well, there's a big safety net out there. I know it's out there somewhere. I've never really looked at it or how it works or how big the holes are in that safety net, but I know it's out there somewhere, so I'll be fine. I don't need to look at it anymore. If you have that attitude, then you'll eventually become unstuck in some form. Whereas if you have the attitude that, okay, well, this is my responsibility to a certain degree, and I should take responsibility for my actions, for my thoughts, for my deeds, and your interactions with other people. That's what I think your attitude to survival should be. It should be something that you take upon yourself to a greater or lesser degree depending on the situation, not something you should just think, I'll have it covered, I'll sort it out on the day, because life doesn't work like that, and we've got hundreds of case studies showing that no, that doesn't work in life, and you will end up becoming a statistic of some type.
Okay, so bearing all of that in mind, when should people be thinking about survival?
Okay, so the short and simple answer that is too simple is all of the time, but you will quickly fall over your own feet if you're thinking about survival constantly when you're out walking or climbing or biking or whatever. You will never have any fun at all if you're constantly thinking, I might die, I might die, I might die, because that's crippling anxiety. That's not survival. The model I try and get people to think about or create for themselves, and it's not a unique model, it's something that's basically in every dynamic decision making training or course you'd ever undertake, and that's one of a cycle of making good decisions and doing the right thing before you head out on your trip or out for your day of working in the outdoors or whatever it might be, making good decisions when you're out there doing the thing, and making good decisions when you come back. Some of all of those three steps, before, during and after, will feed back in to the next cycle. So it goes, make good decisions before you go out, make good decisions when you are out, make good decisions when you come back, and everything you've learned from those three steps helps inform your good decisions before you go out the next time. So to use an outdoor recreation context for that, it might be doing the research and doing the planning and making sure you have the right equipment before you go out on a 3-day backpacking trip in the mountains, and making sure that you've got the right food and you've got the right tent and you've got the right shelter for the conditions and for the environment. You've looked at the likely hazards, you've found out what the access to that area is like, you know how to call for help, all of these things, and you've done all of that training and preparation before you go. When you're out on that 3-day trip, you make sure that you're not walking backwards whilst trying to get a photo of the scenery with your back to a 2,000-foot drop. You're actually paying attention to where your feet are going when you're in dangerous terrain. You're not just blithely drinking from every pool of water you come across. You're going through a simple risk assessment to determine whether that water is safe to drink as it is, or do you need to filter it or purify it in some fashion. You're not eating all of your food on the end of day one because you're hungry. You're actually making sure that you're eating what you plan to for day one, so you've still got food for day 2, day 3, and some emergency food left over. It's 1,001 minor decisions that you can make when you're out there, but they don't have to be something with a sort of sweeping orchestral score in your own internal movie. And it doesn't have to be something that's right, this is my moment, this is when I'm going to survive, I'm going to do it now. It's just going to be, yeah, I'm going to cross the river here rather than cross the river there because, well, that one, it's a little bit further out of my way, but that's a safer place to cross. It's something as simple as that. And then the decisions you make when you get back are things like reviewing your equipment. What performed well? What performed badly? Was there anything you took that you thought you would want as a comfort item but you did quite well without? So you can maybe leave that behind next time. Or are there things that you're looking at thinking, well, I didn't use that first aid kit at all on this trip, so it's of no use to me. I mean, that would be a bad decision. But looking at it and going, well, actually, have I got the right items in there for what I'm doing or the likely outcomes? And all of that, the sum total and the results of all those decisions, whether they were good or bad, becomes your experience, becomes what you put into when you're planning the next trip or going out for the next thing. And it doesn't have to be for a 3-day trip. It could be for the half hour going for a run in the fields near the village. It would just be a smaller set of decisions over a very short cycle, but the next time you go out, you might wear different shoes, you might take a windproof, you might make sure your earbud Bluetooth things so you can listen to a podcast or music as you go along. Make sure you charge them before you went out because they died on you 15 minutes into the last run. Whatever it might be, it's that cycle of decisions: before, during, after, before, during, after. And when you're learning a new skill, you will probably be thinking about these kind of things more often. And there's a balance that comes with experience in a subject where you have to balance out paying attention to all of the things you are doing because you want to do a good job and because you care about your competence with this. You want to make sure that you do the right things at the right time, and the experience of knowing, yeah, but I don't need to take that, or actually if I do this, this and this instead of 10 other things, then everything's much simpler. That you don't need 14 pots to cook with. If you just have one pot, it also serves as a cooking pot and a mug and a bowl and everything else that you might need for a short trip. You could do it with one item. That kind of experience is good. What you don't want to do is fall into a trap of complacency. You have been out on 100 trips and you've never had a blister, or you've never had a twisted ankle or any kind of very minor lower leg injury that could impede progress. So you don't need it on the 101st trip because you don't need anything to treat those things or to be aware of those things because it hasn't happened for the last 100 times. But in a long enough run, all outcomes are possible. So eventually that thing that you think, well, it's not happened yet, will happen to you. And the longer you dodge that inevitable outcome, then you won't take it as seriously. And we see this all the time when we're working with people who are field engineers or people who work in jobs and roles that take place in the outdoors, maybe in the middle of nowhere, but because, well, that's just them going to work and that's just effectively their office is the backseat of that pickup truck where they have the laptop and all the safety gear they never use. They would say, well, there's a lot of safety gear, we never use it, we never need it, why are we taking all of this? Well, you're not taking it for not needing it, you're taking it for that 1 in 1,000 times when you do need it, and it will save your life or save the life of your co-worker. And the last thing on this for when you think about things is think about pre-plans and schemas and acronyms, things that you have to learn that step-by-step process, but you can just sort of shelve it in the back of your brain for when you actually need it. So an example for this is first aid. The initial primary survey for first aid for pretty much the world over now is Dr. ABC, DRABC. Check for danger, check for response from the casualty, check airway, check breathing, check circulation. I've done that, well, dozens of times on real humans and hundreds of times in training, and it's a very simple acronym because it shows you the order of importance. You check for danger first, you check for response from the danger to yourself and then to the casualty, check for response from the casualty because that will determine what you do next. check whether they have a clear and patent airway, and then whether they're breathing through that airway, because you can have a completely clear airway on a corpse that they're not breathing, and then check for circulation, because that's the order and where somebody will die. If they're about to be hit by a car in the middle of a main road, then it doesn't matter that they're not breathing in that moment. If you can drag them out of the road and 10 seconds later they're in a safe place that you can treat them, well, that's danger sorted. And then response will help you determine what to do next. Airway will mean that if they are trying to breathe but they have a blocked airway, well, you can clear that straight away. Breathing, well, you can clear if you can get them breathing again or do something that makes it easier for them to breathe, then they can now breathe through that clear airway. And then after all of that, you can work on circulation and making sure that actually now they have got air going in and out of the body, is there some blood that you can attach that oxygen to? So it's a constant thing, but you think about it as being a spotlight compared to a laser beam. In a broad setting, just have a sort of a general spotlight flooding over the whole area where you're thinking about survival and safety and some basic things. But in times of crisis, in times of emergency, then you need something that you can really hone into that will help make those decisions quickly, and that's like a laser beam, and that's what an acronym or a schema like Dr. ABC would be. That was longer than it was meant to be, wasn't it, that section?
Yes. But we'll forgive you because that was very interesting.
Oh, that's the audience.
So the next question is a little bit different to the first two. And that is, what's the difference between being paranoid and being prepared?
Different for different people, different for different scenarios, but as a general rule, if you're aware of the risks and you can take simple steps to mitigate or reduce those risks without it actually preventing you from enjoying that activity or from preventing others from being able to enjoy their parallel activities, then you're probably in the right area for a good balance between preparedness and paranoia. There's the old statement, you're not paranoid if they really are out to get you. You're not paranoid about rockfall if rockfalls do occur. You're not paranoid about contracting some wonderful bacteria or virus from drinking water in the mountains if other people have contracted those viruses or that bacteria in that area. It doesn't, just because, as I said earlier, just because it hasn't happened to you yet doesn't mean it's impossible. What you should maybe think about if you are worried about where your balance is for paranoia or preparedness is consider the likelihood of that event occurring, maybe by looking at, because there are statistics for these things, or you can read other people's trip reports or listen to other people's stories about things. Think about the likelihood of the bad thing, whatever it might be, from how likely it is to occur. So meteorite strike that's going to hit your one side of the mountains, it's possible. It's happened before. It's happened before in the history of the Earth several times. We've had global killer meteorites or asteroids, whatever they are, hitting the surface of the Earth and wiping out almost all life on Earth. Ask the dinosaurs. But is it going to happen in the next 2 days? Probably not. And if it is, then there's not much you can do about it anywhere. Not much you can do to save yourself from it. But twisting an ankle because you're wearing a pair of Crocs instead of a pair of mountaineering boots on this day scrambling or on doing some gentle mountaineering on a rocky mountain, well, yeah, that's quite likely. Other people have injured themselves quite badly and died from poor foot placement in very poor choices of footwear, and you could easily do something about that. So it's about considering the likelihood of the bad thing of occurring and how much of an impact it will have on you when it does occur. So you can think about, something happens. What's this going to do to the rest of your day? Is it going to be the end of the day? Is it going to be the end of your life? Is it going to be something that just means it's a minor inconvenience and you have to get your first aid kit out of your bag, or put the tent up for a few hours and get inside your sleeping bag while you warm yourself up and dry out? Or is it going to be something that means that yeah, you this is now not only the end of your day, it's the end of your trip, and you're going to be doing everything possible to try and get help to come to you. Think about the likelihood of that bad thing occurring and how much of an effect it will have on your day if it occurs, and then finally what you could realistically do to prevent it. So to prevent problems with crappy drinking water, well, you can easily prevent the unhappy outcomes of that by choosing well where you're collecting that drinking water from, and maybe bringing a water filter or purifier or several methods of water purification with you if you're traveling into an area where all drinking sources are potentially contaminated with something harmful. That's all something you could work out in the before stage of your decision making before you go out. So don't get fixated on all the potentially bad things that could happen to you whilst you're out doing the activity, and don't just watch YouTube videos and Instagram stories and posts and things on social media and things in films where people are constantly talking about, okay, yeah, this is what you need to survive. You need to do this. You need to do this thing or this thing or this thing. I don't know why there's an American accent there, but inevitably they are American. Don't look at those things where somebody's saying, if you don't know this skill, if you don't own this item, you will die the next time you go out into the woods or the mountains or wherever. Because they're probably either trying to sell you something, they're trying to sell something for someone else so they can get more freebies of that gear item or whatever it is, or they're selling you something with the affiliate link or whatever it might be. More often than not, when you see somebody saying, you need to buy this thing or you will die, then chances are it's complete cobblers. It's something very disingenuous and something untruthful. So when you're researching about how likely these things are to happen and how much of an impact they will have on you if it does happen, and how much you can do to prevent that thing from happening, do consider the source of the information you're learning from. So it's a difficult one to tread, and it's a fine line, but if you start going down the road of thinking about preparedness and resilience within an outdoor context, it's very, very easy to end up with a rucksack that weighs more than you do because it's stuffed full of emergency survival just in case items, whereas you could have got away with a rucksack 5% the size of that with much less gear in it, which has sensibly chosen items that are useful and could be used in the emergencies that are likely to occur.
Who is responsible for safety when you're part of a group?
When we do navigation courses, and you've seen this as well when people come along on it, when we ask people, particularly on the beginner courses, why have you come along on this course? What are you here for? An answer we get again and again is that they've been walking or doing things in the outdoors for years, but it's always been someone else who does the navigating, someone else who walks with the map, and they may have done thousands of miles in the mountains, but they never knew where they were. They knew they were somewhere in the Lake District or somewhere, or in the UK, and somewhere in one of the national parks, or somewhere in Scotland, or even in the Alps, or in Europe. But they didn't know where they were in relation to anything else. They were just following the other person who had the map. And that always strikes me as strange, but I don't think it's something that... I don't think it's a particular fault. I think it's actually something quite common that if somebody else is doing something and they're nominally in charge and they're saying, right, this is what we do, this is the plan, we all do this, we are here, we're going up there, it's very, very easy to just sit there or stand there and walk along behind going, okay, well, I don't need to think about that. Whoever at the front of the group has got charge of that. And since being an adult at least, I don't think I've ever been that person, because even if I am on the odd occasion where I am a member of a group and I'm not the leader of it or I'm not the instructor, I always know where I am because I have a map of the area And I would feel almost naked if I didn't have some personal responsibility in that, so that if I was separated from the group or the group disappeared suddenly, I would be lonely, but I'd know where I was, and I'd have my own personal equipment, and I could manage it in the same way I would have done if I'd just headed out on my own that day. I think it's a mistake to think that because you're part of a group, you don't need to have any of your own personal skills, or developing your own experience, or have taken any responsibility for the equipment you brought out with you that day. I think it's something that's quite common in families, and producer Amy might stare at me for saying this, but I think it's quite common in male-female groups where you end up with...
Yeah, I think it's very common in couples as well. Even if both of you are very outdoorsy, I think there's still normally one of the couple, and this is what happens regularly on our navigation courses, is that a couple will turn up, and it's because one of them has perhaps got a bit more experience. They were the one who maybe kindled the enjoyment in the outdoors in the other person, and they're the ones who had pre-existing skills, and so the person who's newer has just not needed to, or not felt the need to learn for themselves.
Yeah, but that limits them then, because they can't go out on their own thing, because the other person, the person who has the navigation skills, literally the map holder, is now a gatekeeper. The other person can't go out and do their own thing unless the person who knows how to read the map goes with them and knows where to go, or the person who knows how to use this piece of equipment or drive to that place, or whatever it might be. So if you're in a group, then I would say everybody is responsible to a greater or lesser degree. And if you're regularly going out in a group, or the same group, then my advice would be for every single person there to be on a shared upward trajectory. So if there's 4 of you and you go out hunting together in the States, probably not in the UK like that, but if you go out and do an activity together, 4 of you at the same time, and you go out 2 or 3 times a month, or 2 or 3 times a year, however long it is, then the next time you all meet up, ideally you should all have a little bit more skill, a bit more experience, a bit more fitness, so that you are all getting to the point where you could either do it on your own, or at least you're not reliant on all the other people being there. There's something that I've seen in other communities talking about resilience and survival and preparedness, about being a value add versus being, well, a burden. Where is your presence there, has it increased the value or the capability or the performance of that group? Because now you're here, you've brought these skills into it. It doesn't mean that no one else there doesn't have those skills. It just means that, well, if 3 of you knew first aid before, and now you know the basics of first aid as the 4th person, well, that hasn't taken anything away from anyone else, and it's improved the overall skills of the group. So for navigation, for terrain reading, or terrain management, or how to use certain pieces of equipment, or whatever it might be, if you don't know how to use it on this trip, then by the next trip, hopefully you will have spent some time learning about it. So if you're part of a group, then you should have some responsibility. There are those occasions where you're just going out on a trip with some people you'll never see again, which is often the client-guide relationship. And I've been that guide many, many times, where I meet a group of complete strangers in a cafe, or somewhere in or the hotel or whatever on the night before a trip, where we're going through the equipment, we're going to make sure everyone's brought the right things, everyone knows what to expect from the route in terms of food, and you're all bringing the things that the company I'm working for has told those clients to bring. It's amazing how many of those clients haven't looked at the route at all before we've set foot there, or they've turned up entirely with brand new items that still have the tags on. They haven't even tried the bloody things on, or they arrive with a tent that's still wrapped in the plastic from the factory.
Yep.
And they don't know, and they get there and go, yeah, do you know this doesn't come with all the pegs you need? You need to buy extra pegs for this, because
Yeah.
Well, reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a common thing.
It is, and it's even in those situations, if you are going on a trip with a commercial provider or as a one-off with an instructor, then the first step of that is making sure you've chosen the right provider, you've chosen the right guide, you've chosen a reputable company, and you've read the reviews from other people, and you've maybe phoned them up or had an email conversation with the company asking some relevant questions so that you can get an idea, do these people know what they're doing? There's that, and then there's also just taking an interest in where you're going. You're not paying for a place at a theme park ride. If you are going on a backcountry, wilderness, middle of nowhere trip, you are an active part of that group, and you have your own responsibility to, at the very least, not be a burden to everyone else. The last thing on that is families, because we mentioned couples, but there's kids and dependents there. You can't expect a 6-year-old to be there with a map and compass and taking a bearing and boxing around a gap in the landscape and pacing out.
No, that's a lot to ask of a 6-year-old.
Is that a lot to ask for some of the 25-year-olds I know, to be honest?
Well, it's not a lot to ask of them. It's just that they do not have those skills.
No.
Families is an interesting scenario. I mean, it also depends on what the day-to-day life of these people is like. Because if you're a 6-year-old from a city, then you're going to be aware of dangers such as traffic, how to be responsible for yourself when you're in built-up areas, but how to be responsible for yourself when you're on uneven ground, when you're on boulders or something like that, is very different. And that's the sort of responsibility that a child could have, is the responsibility for looking where they're putting their feet and not taking risks by running when you're on uneven ground and taking it slow and things like that.
And there's a responsibility of the leader, and if you're a parent, you are a leader, whether you like it or not, you are a leader. And think about, okay, so if everything's fine if you're going out with your son or your daughter and it's just one parent, one child, or one parent and 2 children, where you are the sole person of responsibility there. What if something happens to you? What if you fall over and hit your head on a rock or something and you knock yourself out? What if you have a heart attack? What if you have one of the hundreds of things that could incapacitate you at any moment in daily life, but now you've done it in the middle of nowhere, well, what now seems like the middle of nowhere to your 2 scared children? You should have done something before that point, not thinking that, oh God, death is around every corner, but it's just that, well, death is an eventual outcome of life. We should prepare for it to some degree. Should you have done something to say, okay, so if mummy or daddy can't get up, or if something happens to mummy and daddy, you go into the top pouch of the rucksack and there is a bag in there, and that has this thing in it, that has this thing for you to do. When I was doing more work as a guide, I would do that as a briefing and say, for some reason, if I end up injured or doing anything like that, then if you can safely get to me, then go into the top pouch of my rucksack and there is a Ziploc bag in there, and that will have then you just need to read the note in there and that'll tell you the next step. And that note had things like, okay, so first of all, make sure that you are in a safe position or somewhere you feel comfortable. If I am unconscious, then try and put me, if you know any first aid, try and at least make sure my airway is there and do some basic steps on that. And then this is a GPS. Press this button for 3 seconds. It will then come on the screen. On this screen, you will have 2 letters and then 10 numbers. To go into my bag, and my mobile phone is there, press 999 on the green phone, that'll connect you to the emergency services, ask for police, ask for mountain rescue, and then read off the numbers on that screen. And that would get you mountain rescue on the way to that location with that person knowing nothing else. Is there a simple thing you could do for your children for that? Or at least your children know where things are. And so if the note says, okay, so if mummy or daddy can't move, then try ringing this number. Try ringing this, try ringing grandma, try ringing all these things. Stay where you are. If you're somewhere dangerous, then try and move somewhere very close by that's safe. Put your jackets on, put your hat and your coat, your gloves on. I mean, this all then becomes very situation dependent and environment dependent, but it's something that you could have done as a simple step. It's not about scaring your children and saying, if daddy dies, you do this. It's about making sure that you've done some very simple steps that you can do once every year, so that your group, your clients, effectively your people you're leading, your children, they know what to do in an emergency. You can even practice with this and practice with games. And people do this with the kids for things like fire drills. For okay, so when we ring this bell, who can get out of the house and stand in the garden the quickest and do it? Okay, go. And then you make it, and you have a race between the kids and who wins, and they both win. And it's just, all it's doing is getting them used to the idea of, if this bell goes off, the fire alarm goes off, you just get out of the house. You could do that for games for first aid and emergencies in your outdoor activity. And I had a really good example of this the other week when we went out on our friend Stu's boat. And he went out on his fishing boat, a sort of 17-foot aluminium fishing boat. Went just off the coast there. I mean, the best thing about the next best thing to owning a boat is knowing a friend who owns a boat, and they can pay for everything, and you just get to use the boat occasionally. But once we got onto the boat and we sat down, because I've been on boats thousands of times, I've done a fair amount on boats and small watercraft, but I was sat there, and the moment we got on and everything was running, he just went through, right, this is the radio, this is on channel 16, here's the microphone for it, here's that, this is the throttle, here's the kill switch for the engine, this is that. In this locker here you have flares, you have a throw line here, you have this item, that's where the fuel is, that's where the emergency cutoff is, so that if something happened to him, I wouldn't just be standing there going, what does that do? I would have, probably the propeller's chopping his legs apart. Okay, I'll get the throttle down, kill the engine, whatever it might be. So I'd have something to do. So if you're in part of a group, think about what your level of responsibility should be within that. Even if it's just sat in the back of the coach, looking up at the break glass hammer, thinking, okay, well, I can't do much else, but if I do have to get out of here, I know the hammer to break the glass and the big window is there, so I can get out.
Yep. So there are people out there who like to just take life as it comes a little bit more. They don't necessarily plan 10 years ahead or even 1 month ahead necessarily, even less than that. And there are times when it's nice to have that freedom. But this question is, what if I don't want to plan everything out and I'd prefer to just go with the flow?
Well, the freedom to live is also the freedom to die horribly on a rocky ledge somewhere. That's part of what makes adventure. Adventure is the fact that it's not a guaranteed outcome. Other things can happen, and if for every possibility of the fantastic sunset seen from the top of the mountain in the perfect Instagram-worthy photo, there is also the shivering and uncontrollable shivering and not being able to close your fingers properly because of hypothermia, because the weather changed and you didn't have the right equipment. There's a lot to be said for flexibility and spontaneity and just being able to just get in the car or just pick up a bag and go, or not even pick up a bag and just walk out the back door and come back in a few hours. And there's a lot to be said for developing skills that allow you to do that, so that you don't have to take much with you, or you always have items about your person, so that you can cover some of the basics of outdoor emergencies in short term for your local environment. But it's all about the acceptable risk balance, I think. What's the level of risk that you're willing to accept, and an important part of that assessment process of working out what the acceptable risk is working out what the likely outcomes are, what the risk level actually is for that thing. And then so I would say a good balance to have is do research, learn what those risks are likely to be, and then you can decide whether you're going to take things with you to mitigate, pieces of equipment with you to mitigate those risks, or are you going to just say, okay, well, a helmet on this winter climbing trip would prevent at least would prevent me getting an ice axe or a boulder through my skull, but I'm already at the baggage allowance for this Ryanair flight to Norway. You can tell this is a real example. I'm already at the baggage allowance for this, and that helmet weighs 400, 500 grams, and it's going to take up too much weight and too much pack size in the rucksack, so I won't take it. And that's something I did a few years ago. Decided not to take a helmet, and just I chose my routes differently for that location, and just I accepted that, okay, well, if a lump of ice comes tumbling down this gully, then I can't stick my head out and have it bounce off it. If that lump of ice that hits me with a bare head might kill me, whereas if it hit me with a helmet, it might cause a minor neck injury or a sore head. So it's about knowing, it's about having a balance and making informed decisions. But if you just think, it's fine, I'll just go off and what will be, will be. Well, what will be might be death or serious injury. And I don't think many people who do die alone in horrible scenarios in the outdoors, I don't think they think, well, at least I live life on my own terms. I bet a lot of them I really, really wish I'd brought a coat. Or not walked off this cliff.
Yeah. Not separated from the group.
Not separated from the group. Not put my rucksack down and wandered off for a mile to go and find water, and then not be able to find my way back to my rucksack and just walk in circles for the next 3 days until you die.
Yep.
All of these things, which are real occasions and real events. If you want to go off and just have freedom, that's absolutely fine. I do it quite often. But I do it knowing that, okay, yeah, well, if I do this, I'm more likely to die than if I did take all these things with me. But even sitting on the sofa and not moving isn't going to keep you alive forever either.
No.
So it's all about balance. So that's our 5 questions, is it?
That is our 5 questions.
Oh, right. So I'd intended for these podcasts, only be about 15 minutes at a time. No, I think we're over half an hour now, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah, so this is going to be the end of the publicly available part of the show, so I want to remind you, if you haven't, or tell you if you haven't listened to episode 0, that we have a community that goes along with the show. We have the Modern Outdoor Survival community, which is on the Discord platform, which is a bit like an old school forum server, but it's separate to other social media networks. It's not a Facebook page or something like that. It's something where you can be completely anonymous, and you don't have to even give away your location, but you can come and ask questions and talk to other people and post tips and tell us what you think about the show and join in on live episodes and things like that. But to have access to that, you have to become a supporter of the show, which is only, I think it costs, the lowest level is £2 per month. I've no idea what that works out to in US dollar dues.
It's around about $3.
About $3 at the moment. God knows what that is in Bitcoin at the moment. But if you go to modernoutdoorsurvival.com/support, then you'll find all the links there, and you can find out which platform you can subscribe via, because we have Patreon, but we have a few other options as well. And also then we will contact you once you're a supporter, and we'll give you a link to the forum, and you can go off there and become part of the community and get extra content as well, because this episode will be stopping soon for the general public, but for the supporters, then it is going to carry on, and we're going to ramble on about a few other things later in a bit more of a relaxed fashion. I just want to explain a little bit about how these shows are going to work. So we've got a tick, 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 tock format. So the first 3 weeks there will be a subject episode like this one. So it will be subject, subject, subject. And then the 4th episode in a run will be a Q&A episode. So if you want to send in your questions for that Q&A, then go to modernoutdoorsurvival.com and you'll see the questions thing there, and you can submit questions for the Q&A, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. We have a social media thing to do, which is at Modern Outdoor Survival on Instagram. We did have a Twitter account, but we've already been banned by Twitter. I have no idea why. We've managed to be banned by Twitter before we've posted anything, which is probably not a good sign. So,
or is a good sign.
Or is a good sign.
Depending on your views.
Yeah, we might be doing something right. I don't know. So for the general public, I'll leave you with our 3 principles of modern outdoor survival, which are: make good decisions at the right time, put skills and experience ahead of new equipment, and to always remember, Instagram is not your training provider. Thank you for listening. Modern Outdoor Survival is produced and edited by Amy Green and is an original Outdoor Media production.